Hey guys, tonight we journey into the tangled hilarity and soft chaos of the tale of the Hunchback from 1001 Nights. Imagine the warm glow of brass lamps flickering across a busy evening street, the smell of saffron rice drifting under your nose, and the far-off sounds of flutes weaving through the dusk air. You're walking towards the house of a tailor, feeling your sandals scrape gently against smooth stone. It feels peaceful, comforting, even. But you probably won't survive this dinner invitation. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to know where you're listening from tonight, and what time it is for you. Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You slip off your shoes at the tailor's doorway. His home smells of boiled chickpeas, roasted chicken, and sticky honey pastries lined up like golden bricks along a narrow counter. You glance around and spot the guest of honor, a hunchbacked jester, the Sultan's favorite. His face is creased in a permanent half-smile, like he knows every secret but is too polite to tell. Historians still argue whether jesters like him wielded any political influence or merely served as comedic props. He waves his stubby hand at you and chuckles in a bubbling, almost musical rhythm. You sit beside him on a faded red cushion, your back to the plastered wall. The tailor's wife emerges with steaming dishes of rice, speckled with raisins and blanched almonds, setting each plate down with a soft clink. Tonight is meant to be simple hospitality, a shared meal, a little gossip, maybe a quick rant about the Sultan's new taxes, because taxes never sleep, even in ancient Baghdad. The hunchback is already busy scooping food into his mouth with quick fingers. Bits of chicken cling to his lips, and he laughs so hard at a passing joke about camel traders that he nearly spills rice into his lap. You pick at your own food, thinking about the long day ahead tomorrow. As you sip sour pomegranate juice, the jester reaches for a dish of dried fish dipped in garlic sauce. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Garlic was often used medicinally as an early antibiotic in medieval Islamic medicine. They believed it could ward off evil spirits too. Probably explains why your breath could kill at dawn. Without warning, the hunchback begins coughing violently. At first, you assume he just swallowed wrong. The tailor smacks his back gently, but the jester's face starts turning an alarming shade of purple. His small body trembles, his eyes bulge like marbles stuffed into dough. You watch, paralyzed, as he clutches his throat with stubby fingers, wheezing and squeaking like a punctured flute. The tailor's wife drops the ladle, sauce splattering across the floor tiles. The tailor shouts the jester's name, but it's too late. With a final shudder, the hunchback slumps sideways onto the cushions, mouth agape, a half-swallowed piece of fish lodged firmly in his throat. You can smell roasted almonds and fear in the same breath now. The candle flames sway with the draft from the open window. For a moment, all is silent except the distant barking of dogs in the street. The tailor presses his ear to the jester's chest, praying for a heartbeat, but there is none there. Historians still argue whether these events truly unfolded in the Sultan's time or were woven together from separate moral fables. You think absently, your mind numb with shock. But here you are, witnessing it all, your pulse quickening like a trapped dove. The wife begins to weep, covering her face with trembling hands. The tailor looks around the small room wildly, his eyes darting to the open window and then to you. The hunchback's death was an accident. Yes, but who would believe it? The Sultan's favorite jester, gone while visiting their modest dinner table. Execution surely awaits for such a crime, no matter how unintended. You shift your weight uncomfortably as the candlelight flickers over the jester's lifeless grin. His bent body rests awkwardly against the cushion, as though he is still mid-laugh. there's a bitter irony in his expression, like he's telling you one final joke. Except this time, you're the punchline. Outside, the moon is fat and pale, dangling just above the rooftops like a lantern too heavy for its hook. Inside, the small dining room feels stifling. You can almost hear your heartbeat echoing against the tile walls as the tailor whispers, "We have to get rid of him, before dawn." A fresh shiver runs down your spine. The night is just beginning, and already it feels far too long. You stand frozen as the tailor and his wife stare at each other, wild-eyed under the flickering candlelight. Outside, the street is quiet. Only the faint rumble of a passing donkey cart disturbs the hush of midnight. Inside, the smell of garlic and dried fish mingles with the sharp tang of fear rising from your skin. The hunchback's body lies limp against the cushions, his head bent at an unnatural angle, as if listening for gossip from the underworld. "Help me," the tailor hisses at his wife. "If the Sultan finds out he died here, we're finished." Historians still argue whether capital punishment for such accidental deaths was enforced equally among classes, or if the poor bore the harshest consequences. But here, in this dim little room, there's no time for philosophical debate. Only terror and trembling hands. His wife wipes her eyes with the edge of her scarf and nods. "We must move him now," she whispers hoarsely, glancing at you as though seeking your silent agreement. You say nothing. Your tongue feels thick with dread. The tailor grabs the hunchback under his arms while his wife lifts his legs. They carry him like an awkward sack of millet, his head lolling with each unsteady step. You follow them through the narrow hallway to the back door, the wood cold beneath your bare feet. Outside, the night air hits you with a chill that sharpens every nerve in your body. "Where will you take him?" you whisper. Your voice feels foreign in your mouth. "To the doctor's house," the tailor mutters, his eyes darting like frightened mice. "He lives nearby. We'll prop the jester up by his door, make it look like he died there." A quirky tidbit for your sleepy brain. In medieval Baghdad, doctors were so respected that their homes often doubled as informal clinics at all hours, meaning a corpse by the door might not raise immediate alarm. It would only deepen the tragedy. You pad along behind them through the moonlit alleyways. The cobblestones are slick with night mist. Somewhere far off, an old woman sings a lullaby to an infant, her voice wavering like a tired reed flute. The doctor's house appears ahead, a squat brick building with a brass lantern glowing softly above the carved wooden door. The tailor and his wife set the jester down carefully against the frame, arranging his limbs to look like he's simply passed out, heavy with wine and exhaustion. His bent back leans naturally, and his head tilts forward so his face is hidden by shadow. "Let's go," the wife breathes urgently. Before someone sees, they scuttle away, pulling you along by the wrist, and you hurry down the narrow street, your heart thudding in your chest like a prisoner rattling iron bars. Behind you, the jester sits silent, an eerie sentinel in the dark. Historians still argue whether this tale was designed as moral punishment for cowardice or merely a comedic warning about tangled lies. But as your sandals slap the cold stone, you're not thinking of moral lessons. You're only thinking of the image burned into your mind, the jester's lifeless grin, half hidden in shadow, waiting for dawn to reveal him. You reach home just as the call to prayer begins, a slow, mournful melody drifting through the pre-dawn air. You lie on your sleeping mat, staring at the timber beams above you, but sleep refuses to come. Every time you close your eyes, you see the jester's frozen smile and hear the tailor's hoarse whisper, "We have to get rid of him before dawn." Another small joke floats through your exhausted brain. At least the jester got the last laugh tonight, even if it killed him. Morning breaks over Baghdad like molten gold pouring across rooftops. You wake to the cries of roosters and the clang of metal pots from distant kitchens. The city hums back to life, oblivious to the secret you carry from last night. As you wash your face with cool water from a clay jar, you wonder what became of the jester's body. Did the doctor discover him yet? Did anyone raise alarm? You slip on your sandals and step outside into the warm, fragrant air. Spices bloom from merchant stalls, cinnamon, cumin, and the tang of freshly ground coriander. You walk past fabric sellers unrolling bolts of embroidered silk, their threads glinting like tiny suns. All the while, a single thought pulses under your skin. What if someone saw you with the tailor and his wife last night? Meanwhile, at the doctor's house, trouble is already stirring. The physician, a portly man with sagging eyelids and the smell of stale cardamom clinging to his beard, has just woken up with a pounding headache. Historians still argue whether ancient physicians relied more on herbal tonics or prayer rituals for healing. Either way, this one reaches for his fermented date wine before sunrise. He staggers through his entry hall, rubbing his temples and belching softly, only to trip over something slumped by his door. At first he assumes it's a beggar or an exhausted traveler, and he mutters curses under his breath, scolding whoever dared sleep on his doorstep. He nudges the lump with his sandal. It lolls sideways, revealing the jester's pale, frozen face grinning up at him in death. A squeal erupts from his throat, high-pitched as a goat's cry. He clutches his chest dramatically, the clay wine jug tumbling from his hand and shattering on the tiled floor. Here's your quirky tidbit for today. Medieval Islamic doctors often recommended goat urine as a cure for migraines. In this moment, though, you're pretty sure no ancient remedy could save the doctor from his rising panic. He bends down, trembling, and shakes the corpse's shoulders. The jester's head rolls limply, his mouth slack. The doctor feels bile rise in his throat. He glances around his empty foyer, frantic thoughts leaping like fleas. If anyone sees him here, they'll think I killed him, he whispers to the silent walls. He remembers every petty enemy he's insulted at the bazaar, every patient he's scolded for refusing his bitter remedies. If the Sultan finds out, it will be his head on the chopping block before noon. Historians still argue whether doctors of that era held any legal immunity when patients died under their care. Some texts suggest their status protected them from execution, while others record public punishments to appease grieving families. But this isn't about scholarly debate. This is about survival. The doctor wipes sweat from his brow with trembling fingers. Then, heart hammering like a smith's forge, he hooks his arms under the jester's armpits and heaves him upright. The dead body sags bonelessly against his chest, and for a fleeting, horrifying moment, the doctor thinks he feels a sigh brush his cheek. But it's only the early morning breeze rustling through the open door. He props the corpse against the interior wall, trying to think. Wine and fear cloud his thoughts. If he hides the body here, his servants will find it soon enough. If he dumps it into the street, dawn traders might see. His gaze shifts to the far doorway leading to the back alley. With a grunt, he drags the jester across the polished floor, feet scraping softly like a broom across stone. He pauses once to catch his breath, resting the corpse's chin on his shoulder, as though embracing an old friend. For some reason, that makes him want to cry. "Don't look at me like that," he mutters to the dead face. "I didn't do this to you." Outside, the sky is flushing pink and gold. Morning birds chirp from fig trees, oblivious to his quiet horror. The doctor peers around the alley's corner, then shuffles down the narrow passage, half dragging, half carrying the corpse, praying no one looks out their window. You watch him from the shadows of your own doorway as he staggers past, arms wrapped around the jester's body like a desperate lover. He's weeping softly now, repeating prayers under his breath. And here's your first historical fact today. During the Abbasid Caliphate, Baghdad's alleys were narrow by design to maximize shade, making them ideal hiding spots for illicit activities or unlucky corpses. As he vanishes around the bend, you hear him whisper, "May Allah forgive me," over and over again, his voice trembling like a broken reed flute, somewhere deep in your chest. Guilt and relief twine together. The burden has passed to another. But you sense this story is only beginning to spiral, and sleep will not come easily tonight. The alley feels damp and cold under the doctor's bare feet as he trudges forward, the jester's limp body clutched against him. The early morning sun filters between buildings, illuminating swirling dust motes like drifting spirits. His breath comes in ragged gasps, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill. He pauses to rest against a stone wall, the jester sagging heavily in his grip. Historians still argue whether Baghdad's sanitation alleys were cleaned daily or only during public festivals. You think absently, trying to distract yourself from the macabre scene unfolding before you. Either way, today's refuse includes a very dead jester. The doctor wipes his brow with trembling fingers, glancing around for witnesses. At the alley's far end, a faint splash of river water echoes as a fisherman prepares his nets for the day. The doctor's eyes flicker with desperate hope. Maybe he could pass off the corpse there, like one passes along a bad debt or a moldy bag of lentils. With renewed determination, he hoists the jester higher against his chest, ignoring the grotesque flopping of the corpse's limbs. He emerges onto a narrow dock just as the fisherman is hauling up his nets, silver fish wriggling frantically before accepting their fate. Here's a quirky tidbit to lighten your dread. Medieval Iraqi fishermen often coated their nets with fermented camel dung to strengthen the fibers. Imagine that next time you're dipping bread into hummus. The doctor clears his throat, voice trembling. "Friend, please help me," he pleads, approaching the fisherman cautiously. The fisherman turns, squinting at him through the haze of dawn. He's a stout man with arms thick from rowing, smelling of river mud and stale onions. "What's this?" he grunts, wiping his hands on his tunic. "This man, he is drunk," the doctor stammers, trying to force a chuckle that comes out like a dying goat's bleat. "He passed out near my door. I thought to bring him here, by the river, where he might recover in fresh air." The fisherman's brow furrows. He takes a step closer and pokes the jester's cheek. Cold. Slack. His eyes narrow. "He's dead," he mutters flatly. The doctor swallows hard. No, just very drunk. Please, friend, let him sit with you until he wakes. I must return to my patients." Historians still argue whether fishmongers in medieval Baghdad had legal duties to report suspicious deaths near the river docks. The fisherman, though, has no interest in bureaucracy before breakfast. He scowls at the doctor, seeing only trouble. "Fine." He sighs finally, wanting to rid himself of the trembling physician. "Leave him here." Relief floods the doctor's face as he lowers the jester's body onto a pile of old reed mats by the boat. The fisherman watches silently, arms folded across his chest. For a fleeting moment, the doctor looks down at the jester's crooked smile and almost feels pity. Almost, "May Allah grant you peace," he whispers shakily before backing away. He turns and scurries down the dock, sandals slapping wet wood, disappearing into the waking city. You stand at a distance, heart pounding. The fisherman wipes his nose on his wrist and sighs deeply. "What a mess," he mutters to himself. Then he bends down to shake the jester by the shoulder. "Hey, wake up, old man. Nothing." He shakes harder. The body slumps sideways, head rolling against a pile of nets. The fisherman feels a cold worm of dread crawl up his spine. "Don't do this to me," he growls, panic rising. I didn't kill you. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Riverside fishermen in Abbasid Baghdad often doubled as ferrymen, transporting passengers across the Tigris for a single copper coin. This man, however, has no intention of transporting a corpse anywhere. He glances around the quiet dock, seeing no one nearby. Quickly, he slips his arms under the jester's armpits and drags him towards the stone steps leading up to the market street. His muscles burn with effort as the dead weight slides bump by bump up the rough stairs. He curses under his breath, sweat trickling down his back. Historians still argue whether stories like these were intended as satire on urban cowardice or cautionary tales about divine justice. But right now, you're not concerned with moral lessons. You're watching the fisherman's trembling hands fumble at the jester's limp wrists, wondering who he'll pass the corpse to next. Finally, he reaches the top of the steps, breathless. The jester sprawled awkwardly beside him like a broken marionette. The market street is empty in the dim dawn light. A single donkey stands tethered to a post, nibbling lazily at a basket of wilted greens. The fisherman wipes his brow, looking left and right for the next unlucky soul. The sun crests over the city walls, gilding the brick towers and mosque domes in rose and gold. A new day has begun, but for the hunchback jester, the day ended long before it started. And for you, sleep feels further and further away. The market street wakes slowly, like a sleepy cat stretching under the first warmth of dawn. Stalls creak open as merchants lift their awnings, revealing barrels of dates, pyramids of figs, and baskets overflowing with fresh coriander and mint. A thin mist rises from the stone paving, carrying scents of donkey dung and sweet pastries baking in underground ovens. You watch from behind a pillar as the fisherman crouches beside the jester's corpse, scanning the quiet street for someone, anyone, to offload this burden onto. His thick fingers drum nervously on his knees. Every passing second makes his chest tighten with dread. Historians still argue whether morning markets opened at first call to prayer or waited until after sunrise meals were finished. Here, dawn brings the first shoppers, bakers collecting sesame seeds, an old woman hobbling past with a wicker chicken cage, and a pair of palace guards on patrol. The fisherman's breath catches when he sees them. He knows he cannot drag a dead man through the streets under their watchful eyes. He mutters a short prayer and rises, wiping his palms on his tunic. In that moment, fate, or perhaps cruel luck, intervenes. The Sultan's guards spot the fisherman standing awkwardly over the slumped body. Their polished helmets gleam in the rising sun as they approach, swords clinking against their metal breastplates. "You there!" barks the taller guard, his voice echoing down the alley. "What's this?" The fisherman's mouth opens and closes like a hooked carp. It's not what it looks like," he stammers. His hands wave helplessly towards the corpse. He was dead when I found him." The second guard kneels, pressing 2 fingers to the jester's cold neck. His brow furrows at the corpse's twisted posture and glazed eyes. "This is the Sultan's jester," he says, looking up sharply. "What is he doing here, slumped like rotten meat outside the fish market? Here's your quirky tidbit for the day." Jesters in medieval Islamic courts often acted as unofficial spies for the Sultan, collecting gossip under the guise of humor. Some were rewarded with private apartments within palace walls. The guards exchange quick, tense glances before yanking the fisherman upright. "Explain yourself." The taller one snaps. His grip is iron around the fisherman's wrist. "If you killed him, your head will decorate the palace gate by sunset." "I didn't!" the fisherman squeaks, voice cracking. Please, let me speak to the Sultan. I am innocent." Historians still argue whether executions for palace jester murders were carried out publicly to instill fear or privately to spare court embarrassment. Either way, you feel the fisherman's knees buckle as he's dragged away, leaving the jester's body slumped alone on the warm stone street. Soon after, servants arrive with a small handcart, gingerly lifting the corpse onto it. His arms flop limply, hands brushing the edge of a woven mat. His head rolls side to side with each bump in the road as they wheel him towards the palace gates. The market street quiets, the weight of fear settling heavy on every chest. At the palace, the Sultan's advisors gather in hushed circles, whispering furiously about curses, poisonings, and divine punishment. The Sultan himself sits upon his gold-inlaid throne, rubbing his brow as his Grand Vizier murmurs possible punishments into his ear. You watch, invisible in the shadows, as the fisherman is flung to the polished marble floor before the Sultan. The room smells of rose water and sandalwood incense curling in pale ribbons above brass braziers. Tears leak down the fisherman's weathered cheeks. His fingers scrabble at the floor tiles as he babbles out his version of events. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Baghdad's Abbasid court heard daily petitions from citizens, and even criminals accused of grave offenses could appeal directly to the caliph or sultan for mercy. Of course, mercy was never guaranteed. The sultan's narrowed eyes settle upon the trembling fisherman. His robes are of dark emerald silk trimmed with gold thread. Beside him stands the Grand Vizier, fanning away flies with a horsehair whisk. The vizier's lips curl in disdain as the fisherman chokes out his story of waking at dawn to find the jester dead by his nets. Historians still argue whether these tales reflect actual court procedures or fictionalized exaggerations meant to terrify readers into obedience. You think, heart pounding as the Sultan lifts one graceful hand to silence the room. "Bring me the tailor who hosted him last night," the Sultan commands softly, his voice calm as still water, yet carrying an undertone of lethal finality. Two guards bow deeply and depart with swift, echoing footsteps. The fisherman collapses forward, sobbing in relief at the chance to share blame, or at least postpone his doom. You look upon the jester's lifeless body lying near the throne, bent back, curved against velvet cushions as if still ready to perform. His silent grin seems to mock every trembling soul in the court. And suddenly you realize, this tale will wind deeper yet, dragging all it touches into its absurd and terrifying spiral. The palace guards waste no time. They march through Baghdad's winding streets, boots thumping in unison on sun-warmed stone. Market-goers shrink back against woven goods and baskets of chickpeas as the guards pass, their polished helmets reflecting dawn's growing blaze. You follow at a safe distance, the memory of the jester's slack face haunting your every step. Soon, they reach the tailor's modest shop, tucked between a spice vendor and a narrow tea house. The morning air carries hints of coriander, turmeric, and bitter coffee, scents that swirl around your senses like a drowsy lullaby. But there is no sleep in your eyes as you watch the guards yank open the tailor's door. Inside, the tailor sits cross-legged on a low bench, sewing a strip of indigo silk onto a merchant's robe. His needle pauses mid-stitch as the guards burst in. His wife gasps and ducks into the back room, her veil fluttering like a frightened sparrow. "You!" The taller guard growls, pointing a thick, gloved finger. "Stand up!" The tailor obeys, knees wobbling so hard you fear he might collapse onto his spools of golden thread. One guard grabs his arm and hauls him upright, silk unraveling onto the tiled floor in a shimmering puddle. "You hosted the jester last night," the guard says flatly. It is not a question. "He is dead. You will explain yourself to the Sultan. The tailor's mouth opens and closes without sound, like a dying fish gasping on dry land. Historians still argue whether medieval tailors held any special social standing due to their essential trade, or remained commoners despite the richness of their work. Right now, this tailor looks smaller than the smallest scrap of cloth in his basket. "Please, please," he whispers, voice cracking. "It was an accident. He choked on dried fish. We tried to save him. Please, I beg you." The guards drag him from his shop before he can gather his thoughts. His sandals slap against the street stones as he stumbles behind them. Tears streaming down his cheeks, leaving a trail of damp dots in the dust. Here's your quirky tidbit to break the tension. In medieval Baghdad, dried fish was often preserved with a mixture of salt and ground coriander seeds, both for flavor and to keep insects away. Useful for markets, deadly for jesters with small throats. You follow them back to the palace, where sunlight now streams through latticed windows in golden beams. The throne room feels larger today, echoing with anxious whispers from assembled courtiers and scribes. Incense smoke curls lazily upward from bronze censers, carrying frankincense and myrrh into the vast, domed ceiling. The tailor is thrown to the polished floor beside the fisherman. His forehead hits the marble with a dull thunk that makes you flinch. He lies there trembling, robes splayed around him like spilled dye. Beside him, the fisherman mumbles prayers under his breath, eyes shut tight against the glare of the throne room's braziers. The Sultan gazes down upon them, his emerald robes pooling around his feet. At his left stands the Grand Vizier, silent and watchful, while a scribe on his right scratches furious notes onto parchment with a reed pen. "Speak," the Sultan commands softly, his voice like a knife slicing ripe melon. "How did the jester come to die in your house?" The tailor chokes on a sob. Words pour out of him like grain from a torn sack. He tells of the dinner, the dried fish, the coughing fit, the frantic attempts to slap his back and force breath into his lungs. As he speaks, his voice rises into a wail of panic. "We didn't kill him on purpose," he cries, forehead pressed to the cool marble. Historians still argue whether your jester had an illness of the throat or lungs. Maybe it was that. "We didn't mean for him to die." Silence falls over the throne room. Even the scribe pauses, quill hovering above parchment. The Sultan's dark eyes narrow as he considers the tailor's words. A distant dove coos somewhere beyond the high lattice windows, the gentle sound strangely soothing amid the charged stillness. Then the Sultan lifts one hand. "Bring me the doctor," he orders quietly. The Grand Vizier bows low and signals a page to fetch him. You sense the web of blame tightening, each thread leading to another trembling soul, each knot drawing closer to the final reckoning. Here is your mainstream historical fact. The Abbasid court employed not only Islamic scholars as advisors, but Jewish and Christian physicians and scientists, creating a multicultural center of learning unmatched in its age. The tailor lies prostrate, shoulders heaving with sobs. You can almost hear his thoughts swirling with regret and terror. But there is no room for comfort in the Sultan's court today. Only judgment, swiftly approaching, as dawn climbs towards its unforgiving zenith. And through it all, the jester's body lies still at the foot of the throne, bent back, twisted in silent mockery, as if reminding them, life is brief, death is sudden, and justice is rarely gentle. The palace guards return, half dragging the doctor into the throne room by his arms. His robe is hastily tied, crooked across his chest, and his hair sticks out in trembling tufts. His eyes dart left and right, wild with fear, as though seeking an escape route through the gilded columns. He sees the fisherman and the tailor kneeling on the cold marble, their foreheads pressed to the ground in silent despair. Then his gaze flickers to the jester's body, slumped against velvet cushions at the foot of the throne, and a sob bubbles up his throat. The Sultan leans forward on his golden seat. "Doctor," he says softly, though his voice carries the chill of river stones. "How did the jester's body come to rest by your door this morning?" Historians still argue whether medieval Islamic courts valued direct confession above witness testimony. Today, it seems both will bleed out under royal scrutiny. The doctor collapses onto his knees, tears already streaking down his ruddy cheeks. His voice trembles as he speaks. "Your Majesty, I found him there at dawn, slumped by my doorway. At first, I thought he was a drunkard who'd passed out after a festival. I tried to wake him, but his limbs were stiff, his eyes unseeing. He gulps, chest hitching with panicked sobs. I thought, if the guards saw a corpse at my door, they would blame me. They would say I poisoned him or let him die of neglect. Please, my lord, I never touched him. I tried to hide him only to protect myself. Here's your quirky tidbit to ease the tension in your chest. In medieval Baghdad, it was common for physicians to distill rosewater to wash their beards and clothes before entering court, believing the fragrance purified both body and spirit. Today, however, the doctor reeks only of fear and old sweat. The Sultan's dark eyes narrow. He taps a single finger against the lion's head armrest of his throne. A rhythmic, echoing click that sends shivers down your spine. "You say you tried to protect yourself," he murmurs, "and yet you carried a corpse through the streets under cover of dawn. Does this sound like innocence to you?" The doctor falls forward onto his palms, forehead pressing the cool marble. "Please, please, have mercy. My Sultan, historians still argue whether fate rules men's lives or their own cowardice seals them. But I swear to you, this was fate's doing, not mine." His sobs fill the hall, thin and wheezing, as the Grand Vizier leans close to whisper into the Sultan's ear. The Sultan listens, face unreadable. Outside the windows, doves wheel and coo in the rising sun, their pale wings flickering like scraps of torn linen against the sapphire sky. Here is your mainstream historical fact for today. In Abbasid Baghdad, physicians were often required to pass public examinations before receiving their licenses, sometimes by treating test patients under official supervision. Imagine that pressure alongside today's interrogation. The Sultan exhales slowly, eyes flickering from the doctor to the trembling fisherman, then to the tailor lying motionless in silent despair. At last, he lifts his hand and gestures. The guards seize the doctor's arms again, wrenching him upright. His knees buckle and his sandals scrape along the marble as they drag him to stand beside the others. The Grand Vizier steps forward. His long black robes sweep the floor as he bows to the Sultan. "My lord," he says in a low voice that carries across the silent hall. "Shall we proceed to judgment? All three men claim innocence, yet the jester lies dead. Historians still argue whether such courts offered true justice or mere performance to soothe the Sultan's wrath. You think, your pulse thrumming in your throat. But here, now, justice feels less like truth and more like a sword held high, waiting to fall upon the unlucky." The Sultan rubs his brow wearily, as though a headache hammers behind his eyes. Then he gestures again. "Bring forth the next witness," he commands. "Let us hear from all whose hands touched this corpse before we pass judgment." As the guards bow and depart, the hall returns to uneasy silence. You stand in the shadows, heart heavy with dread, knowing that before this day is done, lives will be unmade by a single piece of dried fish caught in the throat of a hunchbacked jester who once made the Sultan laugh. And sleep. Sleep feels like a luxury you might never touch again. The guards return, their sandals whispering against the marble as they escort in the next trembling figure. The fisherman. He shuffles forward, his head bowed, thick fingers twisting around the frayed hem of his tunic. His sun-darkened skin gleams with a sheen of sweat under the throne room's lantern light. The Sultan watches him with eyes like obsidian. You sense the fisherman's knees shaking as he sinks to the floor beside the tailor and doctor. His shoulders slump under invisible weight, as though the dead jester's burden still clings to him. "Speak," the Sultan commands softly, his voice curling through the hushed hall like incense smoke. "How did you come upon the body of my jester?" The fisherman clears his throat, but his voice emerges as a broken whisper. "Your Majesty, at dawn. I was cleaning my nets by the river. The doctor came stumbling down the alley, carrying this man in his arms. I thought him drunk at first, but when he set him down, his head lolled sideways and his eyes were open and glassy. His voice cracks, and he wipes his mouth with shaking fingers. I touched his cheek, cold as riverstone. Dead. The doctor begged me to keep him there. Said he couldn't be found with a corpse. I was afraid. I thought if I left him at the docks, people would blame me." Here's your quirky tidbit for today. Medieval Iraqi fishermen often used oil lamps that burned fish fat to light their boats for night fishing, making the river smell faintly of fried carp before dawn. Comforting if you're fishing, less so if you're hiding a corpse. The fisherman's tears drip onto the polished floor. Historians still argue whether we are masters of our fates or merely tangled in its knots, he whispers hoarsely. All I wanted was to catch my fish and feed my family. I never meant harm to any man. The Sultan leans back in his throne. His fingers tap lightly against the lion head armrest, each click echoing like a countdown. Beside him, the Grand Vizier stands silent, eyes half-lidded, while the royal scribe scribbles furiously with his reed pen, ink pooling into each curved letter like spreading shadows. Here is your mainstream historical fact for today. Abbasid caliphs and sultans maintained detailed court records written by scribes who documented trials, petitions, and daily decrees, creating some of the richest administrative archives of the medieval world. The Sultan exhales, a sound like wind soughing through date palms. He studies the three men before him. The tailor collapsed in silent misery, the doctor mumbling feverish prayers, the fisherman weeping openly. At their feet lies the jester's body, twisted and silent, his mocking grin fixed forever in rigor mortis. Historians still argue whether this tale reflects a true event or merely a moral fable about tangled cowardice and accidental sin. You think, as the Sultan lifts his chin and speaks. "Bring forth the Christian broker," he orders. His voice carries finality, like a door slamming shut. Let him tell his part in this web. You frown. Puzzled? Christian broker? What role could he possibly play in this strange, dark comedy? The guards bow deeply and leave the hall. For a moment, silence wraps the court in its heavy embrace. The men kneeling on the floor shiver as incense curls through the dawn light, weaving the air with threads of frankincense and myrrh. And as you stand hidden in the shadows, you realize sleep is no longer simply distant. It is impossible. The jester's dead eyes are etched behind your own, a silent reminder that every action ripples outward, entangling stranger after stranger in its quiet, unstoppable tide. The doors swing open once more, brass hinges groaning under their carved weight. The guards march in with a man draped in thick wool robes dyed dusty crimson, a wooden cross hanging from a cord at his neck. His hair is streaked with gray, and his dark eyes dart nervously around the grand hall, taking in the Sultan, the jester's lifeless body, and the three trembling men already on their knees. You recognize him at once as the Christian broker who trades in spices, indigo, and pearls from Basra's distant docks. Historians still argue whether brokers of minority faiths in medieval Baghdad operated with full freedom or under the Sultan's cautious tolerance. Either way, he carries himself with the wary dignity of a man used to watching every word. "Come forward," the Sultan commands softly, fingers steepled under his chin. The broker obeys, sandals whispering across a marble, before sinking into a bow so low his forehead nearly grazes the polished floor. "Tell me," the Sultan says, his voice echoing off the high dome. "How did you come to be entangled in this fiasco?" The broker lifts his head, trembling. "Your Majesty, please forgive me. At dawn, I went to visit the doctor, as he often prescribes me powders for my aching joints. But as I approached his house, I saw him dragging the jester's body down the alley towards the fisherman's dock. His voice tightens, and he clutches his wooden cross as though seeking strength. I hid myself behind an olive tree. I saw him leave the body there and flee. Moments later, I saw the fisherman dragging the jester up the stone steps to the market. I was afraid, my lord. If I spoke out, they might accuse me of murder, too. Here's your quirky tidbit for today. Medieval Christian merchants in Islamic lands often used their own neighborhood churches as secure storage vaults for pearls and gems, believing the sanctity of the building deterred theft. Less effective? However, against moral dilemmas like this, the Sultan's eyes narrow as he listens. His brow furrows beneath his jeweled turban. Silence swells in the hall like a thundercloud gathering weight. The Grand Vizier leans forward, dark robes whispering against the tiled floor as he murmurs into the Sultan's ear. The broker continues, voice shaking like wind-tossed reeds. Historians still argue whether cowardice is a sin equal to murder. My lord, I only know that fear rules every man's tongue when death stands near. At his feet, the tailor, doctor, and fisherman kneel trembling, their faces pale and sweat-slick under the lantern glow. The jester's twisted body lies slumped nearby, his grin frozen in eternal mockery. Here is your mainstream historical fact for today. Baghdad's cosmopolitan merchant quarters included Zoroastrian fire temples, Jewish synagogues, and Christian churches, with brokers and traders of every faith intermingling along the bustling Tigris markets. This tale of tangled lives is no mere fantasy backdrop. It echoes that very real, interconnected cityscape. The Sultan's eyes soften with a flicker of weariness. For the first time, you see the shadow of his sleepless nights and the crushing burden of a ruler forced to weigh guilt against intention. "Bring forth the next accused," he orders quietly. You blink, thinking, "Next? Who else could possibly be caught in this absurd, tragic web?" The Grand Vizier turns, gesturing to a silent servant near the columns. The servant bows and slips out swiftly, robes brushing against stone. The broker sinks back onto his heels, chest heaving with sobs of relief for having spoken his truth, yet still trapped under the Sultan's cold, careful gaze. Historians still argue whether these tales were woven as moral instruction or court entertainment. You think, your pulse echoing in your ears like the boom of distant war drums. But here, in this echoing marble hall, it no longer matters. Because truth or fable, this story is not done, and sleep flees your weary mind like pigeons startled into the bright, unforgiving sky. The throne room doors creak open once more, revealing the silent servant returning with yet another trembling figure in tow. This time it is the palace steward, a thin man with hollow cheeks and neatly oiled hair. dressed in cream robes embroidered with subtle gold thread. His eyes flicker nervously between the Sultan, the Grand Vizier, and the jester's corpse sprawled nearby. He bows low, forehead nearly brushing the polished marble. The heavy scent of sandalwood oil drifts from his robes as he straightens, clasping his bony hands before him. "Speak," the Sultan commands, his voice soft but threaded with iron. "What part have you played in this tangled affair?" The steward's lips tremble as he answers. "My lord, last evening, I arranged the jester's dinner in the tailor's home. It was on your command that he attended the feast there, to spread laughter among the merchants. I brought him the dried fish and figs myself, as per tradition." Historians still argue whether palace stewards in the Abbasid era wielded significant political influence or merely served as administrative shadows behind the throne. Today, this steward stands small and breakable under the Sultan's gaze. He swallows hard, Adam's apple bobbing. "When I left the tailor's house, the jester was laughing loudly, slapping his bent knee and reciting jokes about a donkey who wished to become a vizier. I thought he would return safely to the palace by dawn." Here is your quirky tidbit to lighten your restless mind. Medieval jesters often performed biting satire, mocking even the highest officials. But harming or silencing them was considered ill-omened, for they were believed to carry away evil spirits with their laughter. The Sultan's dark eyes soften with an emotion you cannot quite read. Weariness, perhaps, or sorrow undercut with resigned rage. His fingers drum lightly against the lion head armrest, a rhythmic click, click, click that sets your teeth on edge. "So it was your hand that delivered him to his death," the Grand Vizier says coldly, his voice slicing the silence. The steward falls to his knees with a choked cry, tears brimming in his eyes. "My lord, please," he whispers, forehead pressed to the marble. Historians still argue whether dried fish was ever safe for court feasts during humid seasons. Perhaps it spoiled too soon. "Please forgive me." The Sultan exhales, a slow, weary sound that fills the silent hall like the final wind rattling through an abandoned tent. Here is your mainstream historical fact for today. Abbasid royal feasts often included dried mullet and salted sturgeon imported from Caspian fisheries, delicacies believed to ward off illness when preserved correctly. But spoilage was common under desert heat, even with careful salting. He gazes down at the jester's stiff, bent body. The palace musicians have fallen silent. No flute trills or oud melodies fill the throne room now, only the hushed breath of fear among courtiers and scribes. "Bring forth the final witness," the Sultan murmurs. His voice carries no anger, only the exhaustion of a ruler forced to mete out justice for tragedies that no law can truly prevent. The guards bow low and depart with the soft jingle of their scabbards. The steward remains kneeling, tears splashing onto his robe's golden embroidery like tarnishing rain. Historians still argue whether these tales were recited to lull listeners into moral reflection or simply to amuse them with absurd misfortune. You think, your eyes burning with sleeplessness, but tonight the moral feels raw and bitter, scraping your chest with every slow breath. And as silence descends once more upon the court, only the jester's fixed grin remains, eternal, crooked, and unbothered by the trembling humans left to bear the burden of life's unforgiving laughter. The guards return, and this time they usher in a figure so unexpected your breath catches. It is the jester's own wife. She enters slowly, her bare feet whispering across marble, her black wool veil drawn over her face, beneath its shadow. Her eyes gleam with a quiet grief that slices deeper than screams ever could. She kneels gracefully before the Sultan, her slim hands folded upon her lap. The room falls silent, as though even the braziers hold their breath to hear her speak. "Raise your veil," the Sultan commands softly. She obeys, revealing a narrow, pale face lined with exhaustion. Tear tracks mark her cheeks like faint rivulets through dust. "Tell me," he says, "did you see your husband last night? What part have you played in this chain of sorrow?" Historians still argue whether jester families lived within palace grounds or rented rooms in nearby quarters for privacy. This woman, judging by her patched robe and calloused hands, seems used to life outside marble halls. She bows her head. "My lord, yesterday, he came home after sunset prayers. He was tired. His back ached from bending low to make the nobles laugh, and he asked me to rub sesame oil into his shoulders." Her voice trembles with memory. "He told me he was invited to the tailor's house for dinner. He laughed as he left, saying he would bring me leftover figs. But he never returned. Here is your quirky tidbit for tonight." Medieval Iraqi wives often prepared sesame oil scented with rose or musk to soothe their husbands' tired limbs after a long day's work. Whether merchant, porter, or palace fool, she wipes her cheek quickly, though her tears keep coming. "At dawn, I went looking for him. I searched the alleys by the spice market, fearing he had gambled away his earnings again. But I did not find him." Her voice falters. Historians still argue whether his crooked back was from birth or years of tumbling and slapstick to amuse your court. But to me, he was just my husband. He snored like a donkey and sang love poems off-key. He was mine. Silence swells, heavy as stone. The Grand Vizier shifts uncomfortably, glancing at the Sultan, who remains unmoving, his gaze fixed upon the woman kneeling before him. In her grief, there is no trembling cowardice, only a hollow resignation deeper than any of the men accused today. Here is your mainstream historical fact for this section. During the Abbasid Caliphate, widows often had to petition the court quickly to reclaim property or arrange remarriage before unscrupulous guardians seized their rights. This jester's wife, it seems, cares little for coins or claims, only for his silent absence. The Sultan exhales softly. The sound ripples through the quiet hall like a sighing breeze rustling date palms in the midday heat. His fingers curl against the lion head armrest, knuckles whitening with unspoken tension. "Go," he murmurs finally. "Return to your house. You are blameless in this." She bows low, forehead brushing marble. "Thank you, my lord," she whispers, her voice breaking into a sob that echoes into the throne room's endless spaces. The guards escort her out gently, her veil fluttering like a raven's wing in the perfumed air. As she vanishes beyond the carved doors, the Sultan closes his eyes for a moment, as if her grief has carved its mark upon his ribs. Historians still argue whether these tales were woven to teach rulers mercy or to remind the powerful that all men die laughing at their own doom. You think? Tears prickling your weary eyes. The hall remains silent, but for the crackling of braziers and the steady scratching of the royal scribe's reed pen upon parchment. At the foot of the throne, the jester's body lies twisted in death, his grin untouched by the tears. Terror and regret now flowing freely around him. And tonight, sleep slips further away, carried off by her hollow, breaking voice into a dawn that promises no comfort. The throne room remains hushed, as though the very marble is holding its breath. The Sultan opens his eyes, dark gaze sweeping over the trembling men kneeling before him. The tailor still weeping silently, the doctor muttering broken prayers, the fisherman staring blankly at the floor, and the steward clutching his own shaking hands. All await their fate, shadows clinging beneath their eyes like smudged coal. "Bring forth the final accused," the Sultan commands softly. The doors creak open again, revealing 2 guards flanking a stout, red-faced merchant. He enters with forced dignity, chin high despite sweat dripping down his temples. His fine robe is embroidered with gold-threaded palms, marking him as a prosperous date dealer. But as he approaches the throne, his composure cracks. You see it in the way his shoulders fold inward, and his eyes flicker from the jester's corpse to the sultan's unreadable expression. He kneels heavily, the slap of his knees against marble echoing into the high, vaulted silence. "Speak," the sultan says, fingers tapping once against the lion's head armrest. The sound is soft, yet final, like the last grain of sand falling through an hourglass. "What role have you played in this death?" The merchant gulps audibly. "My lord, yesterday evening, I stopped at the tailor's house to deliver an order of pressed dates. The jester was there, sitting on a woven mat, telling jokes about a donkey that wanted to become a prince. He asked me to join them for dinner." He wipes his brow with shaking fingers. I refused. I had promised my children I'd return before sunset. But before I left, I gave the jester a small jar of pickled lemons. He loved them, always teased me for selling them too dear. I thought it would make him smile. Here's your quirky tidbit to ease the tension in your chest. Pickled lemons, or Hamid Lemoon, were stored in clay jars with salt and their own juice, softening over weeks into a tangy, almost medicinal relish prized in medieval Iraqi cuisine. The sultan's eyes narrow slightly. His voice remains calm, but you hear a coiled thread of exhaustion beneath it. "You gave him food that may have contributed to his death." Historians still argue whether these tales were recorded to reveal moral justice or merely the absurd entanglements of fate. The merchant trembles. "My lord, I did not harm him. I only wanted him to laugh. Please, please believe me." Here is your mainstream historical fact for this section. Baghdad's date markets were so vast in the Abbasid era that foreign geographers described entire neighborhoods dedicated to sorting, pressing, and exporting dates to India, Persia, and the Byzantine Empire. Prosperous merchants like this one wielded economic power despite having little political influence. Silence blooms once more in the vast hall. The braziers flicker, sending waves of golden light across mosaicked floors and carved columns. The Grand Vizier leans close to the Sultan, murmuring softly. You cannot hear the words, only the low, sibilant cadence like the hiss of oil poured onto a hot brazier. Finally, the Sultan raises his hand, and the Vizier falls silent. The ruler's gaze drifts down to the jester's corpse, bent and stiff upon its velvet cushion. For the first time, a flicker of sorrow crosses his face, as though he remembers the fool's jokes that once lightened his weary afternoons. Historians still argue whether rulers who judged such cases felt pity for the accused or only relief at displaying justice before their court. You think, your limbs heavy with sleeplessness. But tonight, he looks human. The Sultan inhales deeply and exhales, a quiet sigh that rustles his emerald silk robes. I have heard enough, he murmurs. The merchant bows low, his tears pattering onto the marble like rain falling on the palace's silent gardens. In the corner of the throne room, an oud string snaps as a musician tightens it in trembling fingers. The brittle sound echoes into the hush, sharp and final, like the crack of fate's unseen whip across the backs of men who never imagined their small kindnesses and cowardices could weave into such a dark, inescapable tapestry. And sleep remains far beyond your reach, caught in the jester's crooked smile and the Sultan's weary eyes. The Sultan sits in silence, his gaze sweeping over the assembled figures kneeling before him, the merchant sobbing quietly, the steward trembling, the fisherman with tears streaking his sun-darkened face. the doctor muttering fevered prayers, and the tailor slumped in mute despair. Beyond them, the jester's body lies twisted in eternal mockery, his slack grin a silent echo of the chaos he has left behind. "Rise," the Sultan says softly, though his voice carries the weight of iron gates closing. The men flinch at the command, their knees creaking as they push themselves upright. Some cannot meet his gaze, others stare blankly at the polished marble, eyes unfocused with terror. Historians still argue whether these court rulings were truly impartial or simply reflections of a ruler's mood on any given day. You think, watching the Sultan's dark eyes settle upon each trembling soul before him. Here is your mainstream historical fact for today. In the Abbasid court, complex legal frameworks blended Sharia law with administrative decrees, often producing contradictory outcomes that scholars still puzzle over centuries later. The Sultan leans back against his throne, emerald robes pooling around him in silken waves. His fingers drum slowly on the lion head armrest, each rhythmic click echoing through the silent hall. Finally, he exhales, his breath a weary sigh that seems to deflate the room's taut tension. "I see before me not murderers," he says, his voice quiet and steady, "but men tangled in fear, guilt, and foolishness." The Grand Vizier inclines his head, expression unreadable. The royal scribe's reed pen scrapes across parchment, immortalizing every word for the archives. The Sultan continues. "The tailor, you fed him spoiled fish. The doctor, you abandoned his corpse. The fisherman, you tried to hide him to protect yourself. The merchant, you fed him salted lemons that perhaps worsened his choking. The steward, you arranged his meal without checking its freshness. None acted with malice, yet all share his death upon your souls." The men sway under his words as though beaten by an invisible staff. Tears drip steadily onto the marble at their feet. Here's your quirky tidbit for today. Medieval Islamic courts rarely executed multiple people for a single accidental death. Instead, compensation payments were arranged to the victim's family or heirs, a system rooted in tribal dia traditions of reparation over blood vengeance. Historians still argue whether these tales sought to reassure listeners that justice was fair, or to terrify them into moral caution. You think, as the Sultan raises his hand, and the throne room stills into a silence so deep you can hear the wings of doves fluttering beyond the lattice windows. "You will each pay a share of blood compensation to his widow," he says. "You will care for her needs as though she were your own kin, for she has lost her only protector." The men bow deeply, their foreheads pressing to the cold marble, relief and grief mingling in their ragged sobs. And as for his body, the Sultan continues, his eyes flickering to the twisted corpse at his feet. "Prepare him for burial with honor, for though his jokes mocked the court, his laughter warded off shadows from every heart. He rises from the throne, emerald robes whispering against the marble, and steps down to stand before the jester's body. For a moment, he gazes upon that crooked grin, and you see sorrow soften his sharp features. "May God forgive your foolishness," he murmurs, so quietly only the nearest guards hear. "For your foolishness saved us all from the darkness each dawn brings." The guards move forward, gently lifting the jester's stiff form onto a bier draped with embroidered linen. His bent back rests awkwardly, but his grin remains untouched, as though he still shares a final joke with the silent world. And you, standing in the shadows, realize sleep is but an illusion tonight. For this tale has carved itself deep into your chest, reminding you that guilt is rarely pure, innocence is rarely simple, and justice is but a trembling candle flickering in the endless dark. The bier bearing the jester's twisted body is carried slowly from the throne room. 4 guards lifting its carved handles with ceremonial precision. The jester's grin bobs gently with each step, catching lantern light and flickering like a candle about to gutter out. Behind them walks the palace steward, the merchant, the doctor, the fisherman, and the tailor, each with heads bowed low. Their shoulders sag under invisible burdens, guilt, relief, and the quiet terror that their lives remain intact only by the Sultan's mercy. Historians still argue whether these processions were meant to honor the dead or to remind the living of their fragility. You think, your eyelids gritty with sleeplessness. As they step into the dawn-lit courtyard, the air shifts from smoky incense to the cool scent of river breezes and orange blossoms blooming beyond the palace walls. Doves flutter overhead, white wings flashing against the paleening sky. The funeral procession winds through silent archways, watched by palace guards, scribes, and yawning cooks beginning the day's bread preparations. Here is your mainstream historical fact for today. Abbasid burial practices included washing the body 3 times with perfumed water, wrapping it in plain white linen, and offering communal prayers before dawn's full arrival. They reach the palace mosque, where the imam waits in his simple white robe, beard neatly combed, eyes calm and solemn. The guards lay the jester's bier upon a woven reed mat before the mihrab niche. The men stand in a row behind the imam, hands folded upon their chests. Their lips move in prayer, though their minds remain tangled in memories of choking fish, sour lemons, and fear-stricken dawn. Here's your quirky tidbit for today. Medieval jesters were often buried near mosques or Sufi lodges, their graves visited by the poor who believed a fool's spirit might intercede with God in whimsical mercy. The imam's voice rises in slow, rhythmic cadences. God is the greatest. God is the greatest. Outside, merchants begin rolling up bamboo shutters to reveal glittering bolts of cloth, towers of figs, and baskets of rosewater sweets. A donkey brays in the distance, as if in solemn echo of the prayers. And the jester lies still, his smile eternal, his limbs finally arranged straight beneath the linen shroud. When the prayer ends, the men file out into the brightening courtyard. Their faces gleam with tears drying in the dawn breeze. They look at each other without words, knowing that for the rest of their days, the jester's death will bind them in silent brotherhood. The Sultan remains behind in the mosque, standing alone before the bier. His emerald robes gleam under the latticed windows' filtered sunbeams. Slowly, he kneels beside the shrouded form and murmurs words too soft for even the imam to hear. Historians still argue whether rulers wept for fools because they missed their laughter, or because a fool's death reminded them how small and breakable all men are. He rises and turns away, his steps muffled against the woven reed mat. Outside, the courtiers await him, bows deep and silent. The Grand Vizier inclines his head respectfully, his long dark robe brushing the mosque's polished threshold. "The judgment is complete, my lord," he says softly. "Shall I convene the court for today's petitions?" The Sultan's gaze remains distant, as though still listening for a final joke carried on dawn's cooling breeze. Finally, he nods, his face a quiet mask. "Yes, life continues," he murmurs, and as the men file back into the marble halls to continue their duties, writing decrees, settling disputes, arranging feast menus for foreign envoys, the jester's bier is carried out through the gates, beyond the palace walls, into the city's waking streets. His crooked smile disappears from view at last, swallowed by the blaze of sunrise gilding Baghdad's domes and minarets in molten gold. The funeral procession winds its way through the waking city, Merchants sweep dust from stone thresholds, donkey carts clatter over worn cobbles, and beggars call for alms in reedy voices. Yet as the guards pass carrying the jester's bier draped in white linen, silence ripples outward like a pebble dropped into a still pond. People bow their heads. Some murmur prayers, others merely watch, eyes somber, as the fool who once made them laugh takes his final journey under a dawn-streaked sky. The perfume of rosewater wafts from the bier, mingling with the earthy tang of river breezes and distant baking bread. Here is your mainstream historical fact. Abbasid Baghdad's cemeteries lay beyond the city's main walls, arranged in sprawling fields of low stone markers, shaded by date palms and olive groves, visited by families each week with baskets of bread and hibiscus sherbet. The guards bear the jester's body through the city gates and out towards the northern burial grounds. Behind them walk the tailor, the doctor, the fisherman, the merchant, and the steward, each carrying a clay jar or woven basket filled with alms, dates, barley flour, olives, and copper coins to distribute to the poor in his honor. Historians still argue whether this distribution of alms was to ease the soul's journey or to soothe the guilt of the living. Today, these men's bowed heads tell you it is both. They reach a quiet slope of land beneath swaying palms. Gravediggers wait with shovels planted upright in the sandy soil, their brows damp with early sweat. A simple trench has been dug, long enough for his crooked frame, deep enough to cradle him beneath the earth's cool embrace. Here's your quirky tidbit for today. Medieval Baghdadis believed that jinn dwelled in graveyards by night, and fools or poets buried there would keep them entertained until dawn, preventing them from wandering the living world. The guards lower him gently into the grave. His linen shroud billows in the warm breeze before settling around his bent limbs like soft sea foam. The imam recites final prayers, voice weaving through the hush, verses of mercy, forgiveness, and the fleeting nature of mortal days. The men gather handfuls of sand, letting it pour slowly over his shroud. It lands with soft thuds, each one muffled and final. The tailor weeps silently, tears slipping from his nose onto the rising mound. The doctor mutters fevered prayers. The fisherman murmurs apologies for his cowardice. The steward closes his eyes, whispering a final farewell. The merchant sets a jar of pickled lemons at the grave's head, its clay rim catching dawn's molten glow. The last to step forward is the palace guard captain. He lays a single reed flute atop the grave, its cracked mouthpiece worn smooth from years of laughter-laced melodies. "He played for us on dull afternoons," he says softly, though no one replies. The imam closes with a final blessing. "May God grant him ease and shade, forgiveness and gentle welcome." The men turn to leave, feet crunching over dry sand. Birds wheel overhead, their shrill cries piercing the deep, settling hush. As you watch them disappear down the sloping path, the grave remains behind, fresh, fragrant with rosewater, shaded by a single swaying palm. The linen-wrapped body beneath the sand lies still, crooked back resting at last, eternal grin hidden from the sunlit world. Historians still argue whether these tales ended as warnings or as comfort for restless hearts. You think, your chest hollow with fatigue and tender sadness. But in the end, all stories end the same. Silence, soil, and the quiet hope that someone remembers your laughter kindly. The breeze picks up, rustling palm fronds overhead with a soothing whisper, like a final lullaby for Baghdad's lost fool. The sun slips higher now, spilling warm light across the quiet cemetery, gilding each stone marker and olive branch in gentle gold. The grave lies still beneath its swaying palm, the earth above it smoothed by careful hands. And for a long moment, everything pauses. The breeze, the distant cries of traders opening market stalls, even the endless swirl of thoughts in your tired mind. Breathe in slowly, letting your chest rise with the scented memory of rosewater and sand. Exhale, feeling the heavy echo of the jester's laughter drift away into the morning air. His story ends here, tucked beneath Earth's cool embrace, where guilt, sorrow, and foolish bravery no longer matter, only the quiet truth of his final sleep. The men who buried him will carry his memory in subtle ways, a softer tone with their children, a prayer whispered into dawn breezes, or perhaps a moment's pause before they blame another for small misfortunes. In their guilt lies a reminder that every action ripples outward, binding strangers in unseen webs of consequence and compassion. Let that thought soften the edges of your weary mind. Let your breath deepen, like cool water sinking into desert soil at dusk. The Sultan's court is silent now. The jester's crooked smile has faded into warm sand. The city hums with life, unbothered by your fleeting worries. Allow your eyelids to drift shut. Feel your pulse slow with the hush of palm fronds overhead. Sleep calls to you, gentle and unhurried, like a quiet river lapping against sunlit banks. Tonight, may your dreams carry you far beyond Baghdad's walls, into gardens of cool shade and soft laughter, where no one is blamed and all rest in tender peace.